You've got it tuned into the Zealous Podcast. I'm your host, Rocky Snyder, and this week, well, it's 5 straight seasons in a row that the Tampa Bay Rays have made it to the postseason. So I thought I'd get Andrew Mitchell on this week. He is the Rehab Strength Conditioning Coordinator for Tampa's baseball team. We're going to talk all about his unique kind of middle ground that he works in. A little bit of rehab, a little bit of strength conditioning. In the meantime, follow us on Instagram at Rocky_Snyder. Subscribe to the channel and enjoy the show.
Oh, welcome to the Zealous Podcast. And this week, we're continuing with a little baseball journey. We're going down to Florida, the Tampa Bay Rays, and well, they're 3.5 games out of first right now behind the Orioles, and it's a hard pace and a hard fought battle. And it's, for me, being a Red Sox fan, I gotta say, it's like opposite season. You know, you have opposite day, well, it's opposite season. For some reason, the Yankees are in the basement, the Red Sox are just above them, and all the teams that are usually trailing behind those two are now in the lead. So I don't know what the fire is going on right now, but we'll put that aside. I'm going to bring on Andrew Mitchell. Andrew is lead strength conditioning coach for the Tampa Bay Rays, and we're just going to get underway. Andrew, hey, welcome to Zealous.
Thanks for having me, Rock. I'm excited to be here.
So did I get that right? Your title? Can you just say what is your official title with the Rays organization?
So you were very close. I'm the lead rehab strength conditioning coach for the Tampa Bay Rays. So I work primarily on our minor league side with any and all players from developmental up to AAA who are coming down for a rehab assignment. Occasionally, when our major league guys have to make a rehab assignment, they'll come down to me and we'll work with them as well. But we have a traveling coach with our major league side that's with them acutely. And then for those long-term chronic rehabs, I have an opportunity to work with them as well.
Right on. So you are the confluence, meaning, you know, when two rivers merge into one, you are that point where rehab merges into strength conditioning. It is, and for as far as I know, that's a unique title, and it's something that, for me, I would love to see all organizations have someone in your position, because it sounds like you're the UN. You talk 2 different languages, and you get everyone kind of coordinating together. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, that's a great way to describe it. It's interesting you mentioned the languages. I would say that's probably the biggest adjustment to make in a position like this. So you do end up speaking 2 different languages on a daily basis. I speak with our athletic training and medical staff every day prior to activity, and then at the end of the day following activity. And during the day, I'm full on strength conditioning, trying to make sure our guys that just have some adjustments here or there are taken care of and are able to stay on our team program as close as possible without falling too far behind.
Awesome. And so I have this vision in my mind as to what rehab strength conditioning looks like. It's the gray zone. It's not the extreme black and white of strength conditioning, and it's not the black and white of acute care and rehab itself. It's like, again, it's where the two meet. So for you're an artist of progression is how I'm looking at it. It's like, how do I progress this person from these rehabilitative movements in such a way that we can integrate strength conditioning? There's obviously going to be some lifts that you can go to probably right away, but then the more symptomatic sites, problematic areas, whatever you'd like to say, are going to need to come up to speed and kind of join in. So what does that look like?
So that's a fantastic question. I got into rehab kind of out of nowhere. My first job ever was with Parkinson's patients when I was a high school trainer in Cincinnati. And that was a crash course in making sure that rehabilitative patients or, quote unquote, like injured clientele don't feel like they're being treated differently. They want to feel like they're part of the real world, quote unquote, of strength conditioning, of athletic performance. Anyone who trains wants to feel like they are legitimately training. And so now fast forward, 13 years later with professional baseball, and it's the exact same thing. Those guys who are suffering from any type of injury, whether it be a chronic, surgical repair, or it be just something acute like an ankle sprain or a sore forearm, they don't want to feel like they are being taken out of the equation. They want to feel like they are still part of the program, part of the team, progressing forward to those ultimate goals that they have for themselves at the end of the season. So my job is to make sure that they are always treated as perhaps a deconditioned athlete, but never an injured athlete. You never want them to feel like they are part of some other class of citizen in the organization. So what you said is exactly what it is. We have lifts and we have programs that they can definitely do without any modifications, without any drastic changes. And then the things that they might need some work on, whether it be our overhead loading parameters for a guy who's going through a shoulder injury, or we have a wide array of conditioning protocols we go through, and guys that are coming back from an ankle, a knee, a hip, a hamstring, whatever it may be, they still want to feel like they're part of those programs. And so it's really just about finding the minimal viable product for them, where we're able to progress them forward, but not stress them so much that we possibly set them back. And we also just make sure that they're able to still feel part of the team on a day-to-day basis.
That's cool. And you kind of piqued my interest in when you mentioned Parkinson's, because I was contracted with a hospital pre-COVID and taught classes of basically exercise for people living with Parkinson's. And not to get too far off the topic, but I'm just curious, because this is something that isn't in a lot of literature. In fact, it isn't in any literature, and I keep looking for it. But when it comes to Parkinson's, if you can recall, how many Parkinson's patients had lower leg injuries sometime in their history? I know it's an odd question.
Wow. That was literally my first job. So I remember just kind of feeling like I was in a whirlwind the entire time. Okay. Thinking back on it, I don't remember any like injury moments with them. There was an early onset class, and then there was a late stage class. Mm-hmm. And both classes were anywhere from 10 to 15 people. The late stage class also including caregivers and hospice care and things like that. There were definitely fall. You have fall risks in both classes.
Yeah. But prior to their diagnosis, it's very fascinating. What I found was that a very high percentage, like 90-something% of the individuals, when asked, have you ever had any significant lower leg injury, trauma, and before Parkinson's? And 90% of them would raise their hand. It was remarkable. Now, okay, so putting that aside, I remember
seeing them. We had a good number of surgical knees in those groups, but I never got around to asking them how those came to be. But now that you bring it up, I'm thinking back to those classes, and a lot of the modifications we had were for people that they couldn't squat to a certain depth because of knee injury. They couldn't do the step up variations because of a hip injury. So that's fascinating that you bring that up. So I'm thinking about it now, and that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah, because if they didn't have proper foot function, they're going to have knee symptoms or hip symptoms potentially. Now, the other thing that could carry over into what you're currently doing now is there was the LSVT big exercises, or the Lee Silverman voice training. That's what LSVT stood for. It's proprietary. They trademark these movements, but essentially it's these large, extravagant movements that they would encourage participants to do, those who are living with Parkinson's, because the further the body reached, not only would we have greater range of motion, not only would we have greater potential flexibility and mobility, but the proprioceptors would light up, and those proprioceptors would be stimulated, and serotonin would be given out, and of course it was a fun time. So dopamine, which is a problem with Parkinson's. Anyway, I could see a lot of the movements, which were exaggerations of gait mechanics, carry over into baseball, because really, if you think of throwing, especially like being on the pitching mound, throwing a ball is an exaggeration of gait mechanics. So,
absolutely.
So how much do you bring that in? If before we even find out what your road to where you are is now, because I want to know what your career path was, but in regards to movements, I can imagine there's in the rehab world filtering over into strength conditioning, there must be elements of gait mechanics involved.
Yeah, so we do tons of sprint and change direction work with everyone, whether they be a position player or a pitcher, whether they be a lower body injury or an upper body injury. We make sure that we're always hitting on proper sprint mechanics, proper basic gait mechanics. Our athletic training staff does a phenomenal job of making sure that guys don't, fall into that habit of having a frozen shoulder in their gait, making sure that they maintain, T-spine rotation in just everyday movement. We are huge on maintaining gait mechanics at both low intensities and high intensities. And one of the things I talk about, especially with our guys who go through, elbow injuries or shoulder injuries, I talk about making sure that we keep them sprinting or as close to sprinting as we can have them being, because those high velocity movements are just the locomotive version of throwing and hitting. I mean, loading up one leg at a time and then like uncoiling the entire body onto an explosive leg on the other side of the body. That's how you run, that's how you walk, that's how you leap and bound. And it's also what you would do if you wanted to throw or hit a ball as far as you possibly could or as hard as you possibly could. And when you talk to guys through that sense, they buy in to sprint and conditioning and their like locomotive mechanics immediately because they see it as that unlock for them. It's like, oh, I'm not able to throw, but I can still work on throwing. I'm not able to hit, but I'm still able to work on hitting. And they start finding those things in their process that kind of help them advance forward, even while they're not able to be on the field actually playing.
Makes complete sense. And I want to get deeper into that. So we're going to, but I want to find out more about Andrew Mitchell and how you came up to be lead rehab strength conditioning with the Rays. So where'd you get your start? What inspired you to follow your path, and how did you get to where you are now?
So my path is it's a bit backwards. So I never played baseball. I was a football player for a brief stint in high school. I was a basketball player my entire life. So came up playing basketball and I wanted to continue playing college basketball. So I went to Elon University, North Carolina with full intentions of walking on. And I didn't think I was going to make it to the NBA, but I thought I could build a career as a basketball player in some way, shape, or form. Unfortunately, my fun injury stat is that I have had 7 concussions. Just the way I played and the way practice was handled back then, there was a lot of contact and there was a lot of elbows to the head, a lot of head to the floor. So I spent a lot of time with physical therapists and rehab specialists. And when I wasn't able to practice, I would get to the key to the weight room and I would just go lift throughout the entirety of, when it was football, it was lifting during football practice. And then when it was basketball, I would go squat and bench and stuff during practice. So that got me really interested in strength conditioning. I had a personal trainer who ended up being my first boss because I became her assistant my senior year of high school, which is when I got started with the Parkinson's class. And so then I went from that to college, had to quit basketball fairly immediately, fall of my freshman year, and just started training. I started working with rec athletes at Elon, started working with faculty at Elon. Now that I think about it, it's funny when you think back on how you got to where you are. The faculty, I have a light falling right behind me, sorry. The faculty that I worked with at Elon, a lot of lower body injuries, a lot of knee replacements, hip replacements, couple low back. So that's interesting to think back on. That led me, I graduated and I immediately just got into private training. I moved to San Francisco. I was a master instructor and performance coach at Equinox from 2016 up until August of 2020. COVID ended that. That was what I thought was going to be my lifelong career. And then living in California during COVID, there was no sign of when personal training was going to be a thing again. I was doing the remote thing. I was doing, online classes and online sessions, but I really wanted to work with athletes in person again. I wanted to be in a weight room. I wanted to be hands-on, and I needed something that gave that to me. So I made the decision to leave personal training. I got into team coaching, and anyone who's in team coaching will tell you that if you don't intern first, it's probably not going to happen. So moved to North Carolina, went back to Elon as an intern. While I was doing that, I was also the director of performance at a private facility called Performance Lab in the Durham, Cary area. And then from there, that got me the job, as you mentioned before, at the Burlington Sock Puppets, a independent baseball team, which then got me to UNC Chapel Hill as an assistant strength conditioning coach for baseball and other Olympic sports there. And then after that, we ended up with the Rays. And from the Rays, I got in, and the rehab strength conditioning coach we had then was also our assistant coordinator. And while I was working with our FCL and rookies, our coordinator got COVID, had to miss a significant amount of time. I was able to step in and work with rehab, and I have not looked back since. I decided that's where I wanted to be with the organization. I was fortunate enough that the Rays gave me a shot and gave me a position where I continued doing that. And now we're here. So quite the journey. A lot of ups and downs, but we're in a really good spot right now.
No, that's great. Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing all that. It's California during COVID was a time of creativity. I'll say that, but
Yeah,
and it
absolutely.
propelled many of us onto different things. For instance, your position now. So, getting back into your role,
Mhm.
one thing that we'll lay out is that the medical and the medical staff, physical therapist, athletic trainer, and so on, they have certain assessments and protocols that they have to establish where to begin and where to carry somebody over in your direction. Meanwhile, strength conditioning professionals, they have their own means of assessment, whether it's velocity-based training, force plates, or movement screenings of some sort. Are there certain assessments? Do you borrow from each of those ends of the spectrum, or do you have assessments, kind of observations that are exclusive to you? You know what I'm getting at?
Yeah, so I'm very fortunate to be with the Rays, in that the Rays invested a ton of resources into our sports science department. So each individual team with the Rays has a traveling sports science representative that's doing weekly assessments. All those assessments are uploaded to our database, and we're able to call on those to help us make decisions if a guy moves up to a team or is unfortunate enough to come down to rehab. We have constant data available to us. Our athletic training and medical staff, they do a great job of performing constant assessments, not just, the actual, protocols that they have, but just keeping an eye on guys during their arm care exercises, or keeping an eye on guys during their warm up and cool down for an outing. There's a large amount of data I have access to at all times before we even get into the KPIs we have associated with our strength conditioning department. So to answer your question, I pull from everybody. So I have stuff that, I myself care about and I think makes a difference in my ability to program for a guy. And so I'll keep an eye on those things. But the sports science department does a great job of keeping everything up to date on every athlete at all times. And then our medical staff does a great job of making sure that any information that's pertinent to strength conditioning, I always have access to. And again, I meet with them every morning before activity and every evening post activity. So there's not a day that goes by that we don't have up to date information on guys.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
And the majority of your athletes, majority of your players that you're specifically dealing with
Mm.
are the ones in the minor leagues, A's,
Yeah.
double A's, the DR, and so on, the
Yep.
academy. And for my mind, it was very interesting. A couple of weeks ago, I had another guest on talking about just that. It was Kirby Retzer actually with the Red Sox, and he's down in the
Yeah.
Florida complex with you. And
Yeah.
and he was saying he really loves the position he's in rather than heading up to Fenway and working with the players there because there's more room for improvement with the players.
Yeah.
They haven't reached that elite level where there is now just minutia or fine tuning. There's not as much that you can do with that level player. Do you
Mhm.
find that yourself?
So what I love about working in the rehab setting, and I was offered a couple opportunities to go be with a specific team or to have a specific role with, quote unquote, healthy guys in our org. And I put up a bit of a fight to make sure that I was involved in rehab. And one of the reasons was because of what, Kirby was talking about. The guys you're working with, there's so much more available to them and to you in terms of taking that next step in their career. Um, when I was at UNC, I had an opportunity to work a lot with the rehab people there, specifically the ACL repair group that was led by Eric Hernandez, who's a phenomenal coach. I learned a ton from him. And when athletes get hurt, I mean, there's two approaches to it. It's either, I can't believe this happened to me, what will I do? Or it's, oh man, I get like a year to just perfect my craft. Okay, what can I start doing? And when you get an athlete who has that mindset and they're like, coach, whatever we need to do, I got nothing but time. I mean, that's like us going to the candy store, like everything's available to you. The world is wide open. So the hardest part of the job is actually trying to funnel your own ideas and vision for that individual athlete. But working in the complex setting of baseball, where you have access to all levels, working in the rehab setting where you have access to all levels, you get to call on all those tools you spent your career building, and you get to kind of build these massive puzzles that might not be available to you if you were, you know, for lack of a better word, stuck having to travel and be in hotels and be in, foreign weight rooms and be in rain delays and travel delays. And, it's hard to work with a guy when he's got a game coming up. But if a guy doesn't have a game coming up, you got nothing but time with them. And that's just a very fun part of the job, that I enjoy a lot. And I'm thankful to be part of the complex staff.
So that's great. And you mentioned tools, and I use that same analogy. So in your toolbox,
Mhm.
you open, there's drawers of it, right? Because you got so many tools at your disposal. And there's the typical tools that you will pull out for almost any project. And then you've got the unique tools that are only there for certain situations, like, I don't know, hog nose pliers or whatever. What are the tools in your toolbox, the go-tos as well as the unique ones? Like what's your what's your toolbox look like?
So one of the cool things about my time with Equinox and my time being a private trainer is that, I mean, you have so much flexibility in your calendar. So if there was a certification I wanted to go do or a credential I wanted to go chase, I could drop everything and comfortably go do that for a week or a weekend and come back and not have missed a beat, because you're the only show in town for your clientele, so you don't miss out on that much. In pro sports, it's a little different. You got to wait for the off season to come up. But my toolbox, I was fortunate enough to build a lot during my time private training, and especially during COVID. So, I know that FMS is a polarizing thing among strength conditioning professionals. I personally love everything that comes out of the FMS and what Brett Jones has and Greg Cook have put together in terms of just, again, what's the first available product for someone who's hurt or someone who needs a corrective? What's the most advanced thing you can get them to do despite the fact that they have, a weak link in the chain. So I call a lot on FMS protocols when I work with guys, especially the joint by joint approach, and just kind of unlocking for them, hey, your hip hurts or your hip is your problem. Have you ever looked at your ankle? Have you ever looked at your foot? Or are you just sitting there in 90-90 in Bretzel trying to figure out how to unlock your hip? I really like calling on those kind of aha moments for guys. I love what I learned from TPI, the Titleist Performance Institute, because if you want to learn how to rotate and you want to learn how to rotate fast and efficiently, work with a golfer. Baseball is interesting because if you miss, it's just a ball. You get another one. You throw again. Golf, if you miss, that's hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars gone. So those guys are dialed in on how do I rotate as hard as I can, as efficiently as I can, as many times as possible without a mistake. So I love the time that I had working with golfers. I still do occasionally. I love everything I got from TPI. And then you have, all your basic, NSCA, CSCS courses and things like that. I was fortunate enough to spend a lot of time with Z Health. So Z Health, you're focusing a ton on, especially what the eyes do for motor control.
So you use a lot of, I'm just curious, but so have I. I mean, we've gone down a lot of the same paths with the TPI and FMS and Z Health with the R, the S, the I courses and essentials and so on. So and to be honest, you're one of the first that in the field that I've been able to speak with in regards to how do you integrate the visual and vestibular drills and assessments and for that matter, the proprioceptive assessments through Z Health. I mean, that's cool that it's in your toolbox. How do you utilize that?
So we do, pre-stretch activations with guys, and we'll do an oculomotor drill. We'll do the thumb out and, eye tracking. We'll do eyes on head and head on eyes movement. We'll do, infinity walk, jog, skip, bound. In my time with Elon, I was working with Jordan Newsome, who's now with the 49ers. And him and Nick DeMarco put out a book, Reverse Engineering Sport. And it was about, the 8-vector approach to training, being able to cut and move and leap in all these different directions. And one of the things that they did a great job of including in that book was making sure that the athlete also had eyes on their target as they made these movements, which, having been at Z Health before, or not at there, but involved in it, spoke to me, and I really liked that. And so whenever I'm working with an athlete, especially on the change of direction agility side, I'm keeping an eye on where is their vision. Are they looking down at the ground watching their feet? Are they looking ahead to where they're going? Is their head moving with them, or is their head, staying behind and therefore creating like a compensation pattern? That's how I call upon it. And we get a chance to do that in the weight room setting just by making sure we keep an eye on the eyes when they're doing our closed chain drills, our non-reactive planned out things. We make sure that we're keeping notice of that as well before we put them out on the field in a high pressure situation.
Oh, I'm excited to hear that because, obviously the brain is the overall governing body of every athletic movement there is. So if we can get to the brain through the eyes, the vestibular system or mechanoreceptors, all the better. And if we can attack it, encompass it and rather than attack it, surround it and utilize drills and tools like that. Oh man, that's pretty phenomenal. And okay, so you brought up this player that has some issue with the hip and they throw the 90-90 or the Bretzel at him. How long did it take you to, and maybe it was very fast because you probably didn't have a lot of dogmatic education leading up to this point, but oftentimes, Andrew, it's that somebody gets some issue in the tissue, shoulder, elbow, or whatever, and instantly everyone's attention is drawn to the area that's barking, the area that's screaming.
Yeah.
More often than not, it's the victim in the crime, right? The culprit may very well be hiding in a place like a murder mystery show. It's that
Yeah.
guy that's in the corner in every scene and no one's paying attention to him until the end of the show. And then you find out, oh, he was the one that did it. It wasn't the obvious answer. So in regards to somebody like that that athlete with the hip issue, and say they had an inversion sprain 3 seasons ago, and they've created a compensatory pattern that irritated the hip, and it took 3 years for it to really surface. How long did it take you to wrap your head around that? Or was that something that was just taught to you right from the get-go?
So one of the things that I pride myself on is that I don't make an athlete go through anything that I can't go through myself or that I haven't gone through myself. So coming up playing basketball, I rolled my ankle weekly, in hindsight, I was just a chronically sprained lower body. Like there was no specific injury. It's just the whole thing was just chronically in distress. And then, I stopped playing and I focused on getting stronger and faster as a strength conditioning expert. And I have all these like ailments and issues. I have all these, sticking points. So for me, when I found out about things like the joint by joint approach and bad neighbor theory and all these different assessments, I wanted them immediately because I wanted to be better. So when I talk to an athlete and they come to me and they say, my low back's bothering me, and I talk to them about, have you ever suffered, a shoulder injury? Have you ever suffered a knee injury? And we're starting to talk about things besides their low back. If they get, kind of guarded about it, I'll bring in my own story. But more often than not, they're down for anything that makes them a better athlete. They want to get to the next level, especially in this minor league setting. You don't want to spend, 2 of your 5 years in the minors sitting at single A or double A, because then you start seeing that major league flag get further and further away from you. So they'll take whatever's possible and open to them. And I was in that same boat. I wanted whatever it took. And so, yeah, I didn't have anything that made me second guess it. I didn't have anything that made me not believe in it, because I immediately started trying it and I felt great. I felt better. I started moving better. I was a kid that, couldn't touch my toes. And now, I can load a bar on my back or overhead and, get my hamstring and touch my calf. And that's something I never thought would be open to me. But just being open to different education and different ideas, it's allowed that to happen. So I love being able to give that to our athletes as well.
And does that mindset, that kind of understanding of joint coupling relationships, bad neighbor theory, however you want to phrase it, does that carry over the spectrum between physical therapist, athletic trainer, all the way to the strength coach? Or, and not to put anybody on the hot seat here, or is there some loss in communication? Is there some differing in opinions when it comes to things like that? Are you guys all on the same page?
I don't think it's so much differing opinions. It's a different scope of practice. So, my job when a guy comes to me is I have to help them find success in our strength conditioning program. I have to help them move a KPI forward. I have to help them turn a measured weakness into at least something that's above our flag line. That's my role. The athletic training staff, if a guy comes in and says, my shoulder's bothering me, their job is to provide the treatment and whatever protocols they have in their toolbox to the shoulder. That's their role, and that's what they've tasked themselves with. Now they will also, check in on the elbow, check in on a thoracic spine, cervical, if that's something they have, experience in. But our athletic training staff, when they get a guy who's talking about having an issue at a specific joint, they take it upon themselves to attack that joint, and then they'll have a conversation with me and they'll say, hey, athlete A came in with a complaint about their shoulder, anterior, posterior, whatever. We want them to come in for a lift. When they come in for their lift, keep in mind the shoulder is having the pain. We also noticed a flag on their data from, elbow and low back. Like they'll name stuff, but they themselves won't address it because they don't have enough time. When you got sometimes 20 plus 30 plus guys coming in for pre and post game treatments or coming in for nagging injuries, you got to get them turned around and moving. No different than what I went through and what I'm sure you go through in personal training. Like, you got an hour with someone, you got to make sure that hour is beneficial for them. If you got an hour with 40 people, now you got to really dial it in. So it's not so much that they wouldn't be able to do it. It's just that I have the time, and that's my role in our system. Their role is to make sure that there's not a bigger underlying problem in that victim, as you said it. In that victim that's showing symptoms, their job is to make sure there's not a bigger issue. My job is to work around that issue and then communicate anything else I might find too.
Okay, and when it comes to your strength conditioning lifts, like there's, I see it as you have a fundamental, almost like a lift assessment. Here are the basic lifts that each athlete needs to achieve, and we want to know, almost like in a bar graph, where each of these lifts fall in their functional ability to perform, right? So is that kind of what you do? Like, whether we're talking pillars of movement, pressing, pulling, or overhead press, loading, hip hinging, single leg, bilateral, like how do you lay it out when you have an athlete come to you? How do you determine what lifts you're going to work with that person?
So we look at a couple things. So based on their position, if they were to be healthy, their lift schedule would look like A. So if we have a starting pitcher, chances are he's going to have 2 starts and a bullpen every single week. All right. In the minimum, he's going to have a bullpen at least 1 start. If you're working with a reliever, you got a guy that might pitch, 2 to 4 times, depending on how the team's doing in a single week. And with a reliever, it's all go all the time. You rarely get a reliever that's an artist who's doing sub-maximal throws, trying to deceive the hitter. A lot of our guys are going to throw as hard as they can and try to strike guys out swinging. So I look at that first. I'm like, all right, how often would you even lift if you were healthy? Can we even do that right now? Or do we have, a bioenergetics issue as well? How long have they been out? Did they have surgery? Things like that. So we look at that and we want to make sure they can at least train as often as they would train if healthy. And then we look at, okay, if you were in season, what lifts would we make sure you always hit? We would want them always to hit a unilateral knee dominant, a unilateral hip dominant, and then a push and a pull. Okay. Of those movements, which ones would you do? You, the athlete, which ones would you do? And if they say, I love doing Hatfield split squat, then I'm like, all right, let's make sure your Hatfield split squat is where you want it, so that by the time we put you back in the games, that lift is running. And then we go, all right, unilateral hip. What's the thing you always do for unilateral hip? For them, it's like the conversation is, what's your deadlift variation? Which one are you open to? Some guys say, I want to make sure I can always trap bar heavy. All right, let's get you to a point where you can trap bar heavy, given the limitations you have as a rehab athlete. And that's kind of how that conversation goes. So we the Rays don't have, set lifts that we're tracking and monitoring for the guys, but we make sure that the lifts they care about and the movements they care about that make them the best baseball players, we make sure that those are always available to them. And so if you have an athlete that says, I love trap bar deadlifting, that's important to me, and then they are recovering from, an elbow injury, we have that conversation with them of, okay, this is what the progression looks like to, 1, rehab your elbow, but 2, get you back into trap bar deadlifting, given that you're coming back from an elbow injury. And we kind of monitor progress up into that point. And that's kind of how we want to get them going. But we don't have anything that we like bucket and make sure every guy can always do.
Okay. Do you ever run into a situation where, I'm just thinking, like, I've got kids, and if I ask them, hey, what do you want to have for dinner? They're going to say chocolate chip pancakes, a strawberry milkshake, and M&Ms for dessert, right? And in my head, I'm like, obviously, that's not the healthiest choices. That's probably not the best choices for you. We need to have color in your meal, but it's not going to be M&Ms, right? So,
Yeah.
have you ever run into a situation where you've posed that same question to the players in regards to their favorite lift? They say hex bar deadlift, but based on your assessments, based on other people's insight, that hex bar deadlift may be the way it's being executed, and from previous compensatory patterns and history of injuries and so on, that is not actually the movement that is going to create a positive outcome. It actually may be exacerbating. So how do you have that conversation if this has occurred with the player and go, you know what, we need to put that off to the side, we need to get these things going? I mean, does that occur, first of all? And if it does, how do you handle it?
So that is one of the things I think baseball lends itself to just inherently. It's baseball is so much a game of millimeters. A guy's talking about if he misses the ball and hits it foul, he didn't miss it by a lot. He missed it by this much. It's quicker than that. I'll sit at our rehab players when they start throwing bullpens. I'll go sit at their bullpen and listen to the pitching coach work with them. I'll also go talk to the pitching coaches individually about what each guy may or may not need on a day-to-day basis with me. And they're talking about things like fingertip placement on the laces. They're not talking about huge gross shoulder movement. They're literally talking to the guy about like, hey, take your thumb from here and just drop it down a little bit. So our players are already in that mindset of, how do I make the thing I do as perfect as possible? So when I have those conversations with them about, hey, you love hex bar deadlift, but based off of your flags, that's not available to you. It's just something you've been doing. I always make sure to come at it from that approach of, hey, if this was your curveball, you would want every box checked. So let's treat this the way you would treat your curveball. If this was your approach at the plate, you would go box by box and make sure everything was lined up. So let's treat this lift like your approach at the plate. And let's make sure every box is lined up before we get right back into it. And baseball players tend to be very open to that. Now, you get guys who are young, they just got drafted, they're obsessed with getting bigger, faster, stronger, and their big thing is, I want to bench, I want to get strong, I want to get huge in the upper body. You got to be a bit more artistic with them there and talk to them about, it's a long season. We want to make sure mobility is always where it needs to be. We want to make sure that you can always, perform at your highest level on the mound or at the plate. But you also get to tell them, hey, let's get through the season. Let's focus on off-season goals later. Right now, let's have a more fine-tuned approach. And guys are pretty open to that in baseball. I've had a chance to work in high school, college, and now professional. And at each point, they're just obsessive about technique, which is great because it makes our job as strength conditioning coaches that much easier.
And what makes it most challenging, though?
You get guys who are hyper aware of their body and so aware that they're feeling things that are pretty much invisible to the naked eye. So I had an athlete that wanted to increase his vertical, and he thought so much about each individual bone in his foot and about how it pushed into the ground so he could explode upwards. And it got to the point where I told him, I was like, man, we're losing time to jump because we're spending so much time talking about the minutia of jumping. I was like, if I told you to dunk a basketball right now, you wouldn't think about it. You would just go jump as high as you could. So you got to teach guys to also let it loose at times, to trust their body, to trust that, they're in a good spot. They've done the homework. They've done all the right things. You praise them for being hyper aware, and then they're so good at it, you kind of want them to let it loose. You want them to step on the gas and let it happen, express their full athleticism. And you got to kind of then teach them to not be as hyper aware, to kind of let it out. So that's where it gets difficult, but benefits and drawbacks of every approach, I assume.
And then when it comes to communicating with other coaches, such as the strength conditioning coach, you're in kind of like the lead role, handing the baton off to them in some ways. How does that work for you? Is it a free flowing conversation with them? Is there, with this role that you're in, I won't say animosity, but is there any kind of divisiveness between you and the rest of the strength group, or for that matter, with medical staff?
No, I mean, just like any team, you're gonna have opinions, and the biggest thing with opinions is that people just want to be heard. They want to make sure you understand that you're listening to them and understanding where they're coming from. So as long as we always approach it from that point of, here's what my experience has taught me and that I want you to be aware of. This is what your experience has taught you and you want me to be aware of. How do we best make those things meet to help the athlete? As long as we come at it from that point, we all get along pretty well. Stress leads to moments of inflection, and that's totally fine. We don't hold grudges. We don't push and proud on each other to try to fight for supremacy in the athletic setting, because it's the athlete's life that's, for lack of a better description, on the line here. A guy has dedicated his life to throwing a ball. We want to make sure he can throw the ball, and that's all that matters to us. Strength staff wise, I mean, our strength staff is pretty phenomenal in terms of they roll with the punches. I mean, the minor league schedule is not forgiving. Those minor league gyms are not conducive to a full toolbox. The hours are bonkers. Our strength staff does a great job of taking information and doing the best they can with it. If they have questions, they're great at asking questions, but I very rarely have had to have a conversation with a strength coach where they didn't believe in what we were trying to do, but more so they wanted to know, how is it possible for them to make it happen with what they have available to them. So I have a full weight room. And multiple open fields to work with. Our traveling strength coaches, they have a broom closet with maybe a half rack and some 20-pound dumbbells and a med ball, and they get the field from 10 to 10:15. Like their resources are limited on game day. So we just have that conversation with them about how to make it work. And then on the medical side, it's open communication. If you have an idea, share it. If you got an opinion, share it. Because the last thing we want is for someone to not feel heard, and that falls back on the athlete. We want to make sure the quality of care for the athlete is always as high as it can possibly be. And the best way to ensure that is that we are constantly open and back and forth with each other.
Okay, one of my final questions, which that was a great answer, by the way, but one of my final questions is, I hate asking the job interview style question, but it's just coming up into my mind. Andrew, where do you see yourself in 3 to 5 years?
I mean, I've been fortunate enough to get to where I want to be twice now. Pre-COVID, I got to where I wanted to be as a private trainer. And up until this point, the goals that have been available to me, I have been able to accomplish each goal in that time frame post-COVID. As a team sector strength conditioning coach, the main goal is just continue to be available to athletes as much as I possibly can be. Right now I'm in a good position as a decision maker. I would love to be available to athletes as more of a decision maker. I love programming. I love working with our coordinators on programming, and they're really great and open to, any and all suggestions, not just from me, but our entire staff. And so I'd love to be in a position someday where I get to give to other coaches what, my mentors and coordinators have given to me, which is just opportunities to feel included in the leadership process and feel included in the decision-making process. So in 3 to 5 years, I would love to be just, a better leader, have, maybe a few more decisions allotted to me as my scope of practice, and just continue to give back to young coaches the way that I've been given back to throughout my entire career.
All right. So I'm surprised there was no NBA kind of in the forecast seeing you play basketball, but that's good. That was a solid answer. So if people want to just follow your pursuits a little bit, of course, I'll put the Rays website in there, but your own social media, if you post content or anything like that, is there any way people can get to know you a little bit more?
Yeah, so I love networking and talking to coaches and athletes alike. So I don't post as much as I used to in season, but off season I try to post more. My Instagram is Strength Coach Mitchell, just all one word. My last name is 2 L's, Mitchell. So Strength Coach Mitchell for Instagram. And if someone wants to, contact me personally, they can DM me or they can just shoot me an email. My personal email, which is much easier to get in touch with me on, is andrewmitchell.strength@gmail.com. And if I don't get to you immediately, it's probably because there's another pressing matter, but I try to respond to everyone best I can.
Well, that's great. I really appreciate how you open your doors up for anybody. And I love doing the same. The talking shop just keeps me going, and I love reaching out to guys like yourself. And I can't thank you enough for coming on, Zealous, and your organization for allowing us to have this time together. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when the trainer of the year sends you a message asking you to talk, you're gonna make sure you hop on that meeting, man. I mean, congratulations to you on everything you've accomplished. It was pretty awesome seeing your work presented at NSCA this year. So thank you very much for the chance to kind of be part of your circle. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Had I known you were in the room at that moment, I definitely would have come across, but it's good connecting with you now.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's a wrap for this episode of the Zealous Podcast. Thank you, Andrew, for coming on. Thank you, Tampa Bay. Good luck in the postseason. And, well, click that subscribe button. Tell a few folks that are sports fans and want to know a little bit more behind the scenes, because that's what we're all about at Zealous. We'll see you next week.